Hey guys, welcome back to the Full Code. In this video, I'm going to go slightly outside of my comfort area. So I'm going to go slightly outside of the coaching aspects, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the major breaking news. Obviously, no longer breaking, but the news that Daniel Levy has either stepped down or been stepped down as executive chairman of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. This is obviously groundbreaking news for the football club. He's been there for 24 years, just shy of 25 years. And because it's such a sea change for us, I've decided to make a very quick video. As ever with these kind of things, I tend to be fairly neutral on aspects when it comes to Daniel Levy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little look at it through a few graphics and a few images because they quite helpfully sum up the way that I feel about it. If you are here because you very much dislike Daniel Levy or the people around Daniel Levy or the work that he's done, then you might be a bit disappointed. If you are here and you are a staunch defender of Daniel Levy, again, you might be a bit disappointed because I think I fall somewhere in that middle bracket and probably just on the we could have done better, but it wasn't all bad, is maybe a summation of where we are. So if we have a look at this first graphic that I've got on the screen, I've plotted Tottenham Hotspur's Premier League finishes during Daniel Levy's tenure since he took over in 2001. Now, obviously, he did not take over at the beginning of the season, so maybe you can cut a bit of slack on our 2000 and 2001 league finish. We were a pretty poor football team back then and a pretty poor outfit. However, what I do want you to pay attention to. You can obviously ignore the red and the blue lines for the median and the average finishes because they don't really mean very much in the world of football where so much changes during and at the end of the season. Take a good look at the trend line. So that's the green dotted line. And this is the one where I fall down on the side of Daniel Levy deserving credit. So when Daniel Levy and ENIC took the majority share of Tottenham Hotspur from Alan Sugar in 2001. We were, as I said, a pretty poor football team. Now, I may be a bit older than some, younger obviously than others, and I remember what Tottenham were like in the 80s. When I grew up, I remember Tottenham in the 90s, which is a pretty horrible time, and the early 2000s were similar. But the trend line tells you what you need to know about Tottenham as a football club and our league positions. So the overall trend over the 24 years is positive, i.e., it's an upward trend. Now you can see the graph itself with our finishes in that kind of that golden line with the plotted points and the numbers against it. Those are our league finishes for each of the years. We are a bit all over the place, but when you plot it and you take away a couple of the outliers, then you end up with the trend line that looks like it does, which is it starts kind of somewhere lower mid-table, kind of top half of the table, but lower top half. And then it goes up, and we are a solid and established top six side in the Premier League. And that is certainly not the case. And that's not who we were when I was growing up. And that's not who we were when ENIC took over and when Daniel Levy took his position. So overall, you could pull out loads of these years and you can talk about what we did really well. Did we overachieve? Did we underachieve? Missed opportunities, which I will come to in a second. But the overall trend across the 24 years is that Tottenham Hotspur, in terms of league finishes, has been improving. We have been getting better as a football club, even though obviously the finishes go up and down. And that is also true of lots of other metrics. So the overall direction has been an upward one. And for that, Daniel Levy, the people around him, ENIC, whoever it might be, the Lewis family, deserve some credit. And they will get that from me, absolutely. Now, if we move on to the next image, you can see the club's estimated value. Now, this is quite a difficult one because there will be, it's quite subjective and we've only really got one line in the sand, which is an actual valuation when the club was bought in 2001, and ENIC took that majority share. However, we're using estimated club values, and I think these are, pretty rational and pretty reasonable. They're probably on the conservative side as well. But again, look at the trend line. We were bought and we were a middling to small top division club. We were fairly solid. We hadn't been relegated in a very, very long time. So we were quite stable in that respect, although we came very, very close to it several times while I was growing up, or, a few times, not several times. That's unfair. And so in 2001, you can see our valuation. That's the little grey bar on the left-hand side. The first 10 years, just under 10 years to 2010, we can see, decent growth. And roughly, it's been put there at, 0.28 billion in terms of valuation, which is decent increase. But the key increase has been in the following kind of 15 years after that. So the last 15 years. And obviously that 2010 time corresponds with the improvement in the team that led us to becoming a Champions League team. And then from then, we've used that as a springboard to grow the club. And so a lot of the good work that Daniel Levy rightly gets credit for, the incredible training facilities, and I know the old training facilities. I've not been to the new ones. I've not been fortunate enough to do that, but I do know the old ones. They were good, but they were not exceptional. But what we've got now is exceptional. And obviously, we have got a European leading, maybe even a world leading football stadium. It's certainly in that top kind of 3 or 5 bracket for football stadiums globally, you would say. And then you can see that represented in the value of the football club. Now, I think 2.6 billion is probably on the low side. You might even add a billion to that quite comfortably in terms of what the club might expect in terms of valuation should it be bought out or a majority share taken by an investor. So looking at that, you can see based on these calculations, this is all very rough numbers. None of this should be taken as actuals, but that's, a 9-fold increase in value from 2010 to 2025. So once again, all of the things that we talk about, the business angle, the sustainability, the safety and the strength and the structure that is behind the football club, Daniel Levy and the people around him deserve great credit. If we roll this on to the next slide, let's look at trophies. And this is where it kind of slips over to the other side. So this is all of Tottenham Hotspur's major trophies on the screen at the moment. Now, the first kind of 40, 50 years need to be caveat with a couple of very decent breaks for major global conflicts. But other than that, obviously Tottenham Hotspur were an amateur football club. We were the first amateur football club to win the FA Cup, so a huge achievement there all the way at the beginning of the century. But we were traditionally a cup team, but we had a couple of periods of success in that time where notably in the early 60s, we'd won the league 10 years prior, but in the early 60s, Bill Nicholson built a fantastic team and he had more sustained success. But it should be pointed out that we've got a league and cup double in there. We've got a cup the following year. Then we've got a European trophy. So even though it was a sustained success, i.e. multiple trophies, it was in quite a tight period of time. But if you look across the 1960s and into the early 1970s, you can see some significant success. We then had a huge dip in our form. And then we go into the 1980s. So that 20-year block, again, you've got a little period with a couple of FA Cups in the early 80s. And then, we've got a European trophy in there, another European Cup a decade later in the early 90s. For me, maybe my greatest moment as a Tottenham Hotspur fan because of how old I was when we won that and how much it meant to me at the time. And then after that, we've got a pretty barren period. So you're looking at 20-year blocks with only one trophy in each. Obviously, we won one in 1999. We then won the Carling Cup in 2008 and the Europa League last season. So by trophies, you could say that if we would take from 1951 onwards, so leaving out the early history of Tottenham Hotspur, from the 1950s onwards, we have underachieved in terms of trophies. We should also compare that to the growth of the football club. And this is where I think most people come down, negatively on Daniel Levy in his tenure, is that we have not won enough trophies given the size of the club, given the investment, given the stability and the security that we've got. We've not won enough trophies, and that I absolutely agree with. So, looking at this graph, you can see that we have underperformed on the football pitch in terms of trophies. As I've said at the beginning, in terms of league finishing, we have been growing. We've had a good, steady increase or incline in our performances, but trophies, we've not been able to get over the line. We have had too many occasions where we've got just up to the line and we've not succeeded in getting it over the line. And as much as you could lay that wholly at the feet of Daniel Levy, didn't sign this person, he didn't push the boat out that little bit extra, additional responsibility has to be taken by the playing staff and by the managers, the coaches, and the backroom staff who were involved at that moment in time. So it's not entirely at Levy's door. And then the people who want to be as negative as they can would say, well, Levy hired these people, so it's on him. Yes, ultimate responsibility falls on the chairman of the football club, but other people, if you were that way in your business, you were turning up every day and doing a terrible job and then expecting somebody else to carry the can. I don't think that would wash. So Daniel Levy certainly did not get every decision right, but I think we can all agree we've underachieved when it comes to trophies over the last 24 years of his tenure. Now, let's have a little look and dig in. We're going to have a look at our Premier League finishes again. There they are, plotted on the screen, and the estimated net spend. So some of these numbers are not known, or they're not finalised. But what I find interesting about this particular graphic is you can see that we were, from the early days of tenure, with a couple of exceptions, we were roughly on an upward trend of net investment. And then as we moved into the decade prior to the opening of the stadium, you can see a huge drop off. Now, there's a few caveats to the numbers, obviously, because net spend will take into account player sales, but we've never been particularly good at player sales. So it can almost be taken as a signal of ambition, how much money is going out the door. And you can see here that we've got some negative net spend. So we are not spending money. We've had a couple of transfer windows that are in there where we've not signed any players whatsoever, and therefore player sales are bringing in money. And I think this is where a lot of people are absolutely incandescent with Daniel Levy, feeling that we have not been ambitious enough. We did not put enough money on the table. And some of that may well correlate with putting the finances in a place to be able to finance the stadium. Whether you think that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, whether we should have been more ambitious or not, that is up to everybody's opinion. I personally feel we could have been more ambitious in that time. We could have been much better at player sales, which also would have allowed us to spend more money, refresh the teams, particularly that Pochettino era, where the wheels realistically came off in Pochettino's final season, but the refresh of the squad needed to happen a season and a half, 2 seasons before that. And we didn't do that. We didn't do it sufficiently. We didn't back that manager. We didn't then give him the benefit of the doubt post the Champions League final defeat to Liverpool. And then since then, we have been strategically moving from one strategy to another, and that is very unlikely to be successful. So we've seen, obviously, the very up and down nature of our performances, short-term gain, and then immediate pain afterwards, with the ultimate reflection of that being a Europa League trophy, one of our most important trophies in 40 years, and our worst league finish in multiple decades. So You can, however, see that there is plenty of spending happening since the stadium has opened. And so, to that end and to that effect, the spending is there. The ambition to spend money is there once the stadium was financed, and that's been done brilliantly. However, the other criticism you could lay at Daniel Levy is, was that money spent in the right place? And I think the strategy, the different types of manager, the hopping all over the place, the hiring and firing, bringing in players, spending big money on players for a manager, then getting rid of that manager, all of those kind of things, they are absolutely faults that a lot of that can fall at Daniel Levy's feet, and he can and should be rightly held to account for those parts of the performance of the football club. Now, finally, we're going to come on to the last slide here, and this is the profit and loss of all the football clubs in the time that Daniel Levy's been in charge. And you can see down there, Tottenham Hotspur, financially an incredibly well-run football club. We are that big green bar. Nobody else has one comparable to us, which means we are financially extremely well run. However, this is where we're going to come back to the ambition and have we spent the money in the right places. Would you swap with a lot of those other teams that are there with the massive red bars? You might argue you would with Chelsea, but look how big that bar is and look how much they've spent, and they operate on a different model. They had oligarch money, and now they've got private equity money. They're able to sustain what they do by doing that. Tottenham Hotspur would need to have owners, which wouldn't have been Daniel Levy. It would have had to been the Tavistock Group, who were willing to finance in that way, and they're not. Those are not the owners we have. So you could say, I would prefer to have an oligarch. I would prefer to have that money, throw all the money in the world at it, and then hoover up all the trophies. Yeah, would have been a fun ride. But that's not who we had. I certainly wouldn't swap with a lot of those other clubs slightly further down, though, who've got those massive red bars. And for some of them, clubs like Aston Villa, it's already happened to Everton. Those chickens are coming home to roost. And that is what is causing them a great deal of pain in transfer windows and their financial situations at this moment in time. And we don't have that issue. So, what I'll say finally on this one is that we have definitely underperformed trophy wise. We have improved and grown massively as a football club in terms of not only performance but reputation and where our standing is in the game. Financially, we're one of the best in the business. However, I kind of fall down on a feeling that if we had a risk appetite that was anywhere from 5 to 15% more than it has been financially, and a little bit better strategy in terms of a little bit more patience, uh, you know, really battening down the hatches and sticking with Pochettino, for example, when it had all gone wrong, but with a view that we hadn't done what we needed to do to give him the platform, give him the success, those kind of things. I believe Tottenham would have been far more successful on the thing that most people care about, which is those trophies. Obviously, league finishes and winning the league would be in there, which is slightly different to winning it. Well, it's very different to winning a trophy. But yes, my feeling is that just push it that little extra bit, that 5, 10, 15% on transfers and spend and wages. And I feel we may well have got some of those trophies over the line, and we may well have got more success than we had. It's impossible to know because it creates an alternate timeline and there's no way for us to know that. But that's my feeling on it. And so, therefore, my hope going forward is whatever happens, whoever is in charge and whoever comes in to take over, if anybody new is coming in, is that at the very least, they do that. We might not go from being really, really tightly fiscally run to just spraying money all over the place. And I don't mind that at all because I don't particularly like that way of doing it. But that slightly higher risk appetite, pushing that a little bit harder to get the player, the number one target, as opposed to target 2, 3, or 4, missing out on key individuals, put the money on the table, but only in that kind of 5 to 15% extra bracket. I believe that will allow us to compete, because Tottenham competing against the Liverpools, the Arsenals, the Chelseas, the Man Cities, we will have to pay a little bit more to get the players that we want that they might also want. And I feel that we end up getting over the line. You get the player, you pay the wages they want, you've got a slightly higher wage structure, you can then be successful. You will have a springboard as long as you're bringing the right people in, and that will always be something that the guy or the woman at the top will have to take responsibility for. And so we've overall, as a general trend, we've been trending upwards as a football club, as an entity. We've been getting bigger, but we've not had enough trophy success. And that's where I'm at. That's where I am with Daniel Levy and with the tenure that he's had. I thank him for what he's done. I do hold him responsible for what he hasn't, or the bits that he's got wrong, and I think I have every right to do that as a Tottenham fan, as a pretty much lifelong season ticket holder as well. And I'm hoping for something slightly better. I'll leave it there, guys. Let me know what you think, and as ever, come on, Tottenham.